Lena's life had always been about survival. Every day she woke up before the sun, ready to face another day of endless tasks and never-ending to-do lists. As a single mother, her focus was always on her children, Olivia, her shy and thoughtful 8-year-old, and Ryan, her rebellious 12-year-old. They were her world. She worked tirelessly to provide for them, taking on 2 part-time jobs in addition to her full-time position at a local grocery store. But the work didn't stop there. At night, after the kids had gone to bed, Lena spent hours balancing the books, calculating how to stretch the pennies she earned just a little bit further. Bills loomed over her like storm clouds, their due dates creeping closer with each passing day. Her paycheck, always barely enough to cover the essentials, often felt like a cruel joke. It seemed impossible to break free from the cycle of exhaustion and uncertainty. It was on one of those long, tiring evenings when Lena found herself standing at the bus station, waiting for the bus to take her to her second job. The cold wind stung her face, but she didn't mind. It matched the chill she had felt in her heart all day. She watched the people around her, their faces tired but indifferent. She didn't recognize most of them, and they didn't look at her either. The anonymity was strangely comforting. But then she saw him. An elderly man, sitting alone on the bench, his face etched with years of hardship. His clothes were ragged, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to rummage through his worn-out pockets. Lena noticed the frustration on his face as he muttered to himself, unable to find the small amount of change he needed to buy a bus ticket. She paused, torn. Her eyes moved to her own purse, where she had only a few bills left, barely enough to cover a week's worth of groceries. She was accustomed to this kind of struggle, constantly having to make hard decisions between paying bills or providing for her children. Her whole life was a balancing act, and sometimes the weight of it all felt unbearable. But something about this man, sitting there with his head down, defeated, struck a chord deep inside her. Lena had always believed in kindness, even when it seemed like there was none left in the world. She had grown up with a mother who taught her that no matter how hard life got, showing compassion was never a mistake. And in this moment, when everything inside her screamed that she couldn't afford to give, her heart knew that this was one of those times when it was important to act. She approached him cautiously, as though afraid that her voice might break, the fragile spell of silence that hung in the air. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth she didn't feel at the moment. "Can I help you with your ticket?" The old man looked up at her, his eyes narrowing at first, as if trying to make sense of the woman offering him help. He didn't speak for a moment, as though unsure whether to trust her. Lena could see the skepticism in his gaze. This was a man who had seen too much pain in his life to believe that people gave things away for nothing. And yet, there was something in his eyes that softened when he looked at her, a flicker of gratitude hidden beneath layers of mistrust. "Thank you, but I don't want to take your money," he finally said, his voice shaky. Lena smiled, though it felt like an effort. "It's not a problem. I've been in your shoes before," she said, her words ringing with more truth than she cared to admit. "Please let me help." She reached into her purse, taking out the last few bills she had, just enough to buy the old man a ticket and cover the fare for her own bus ride. She handed him the money without hesitation, watching as his weathered hands took it, his fingers trembling slightly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The bus station, now growing more crowded, seemed to fade away. It was as if they were the only two people in the world at that moment, their fates intertwined by something deeper than just the exchange of money. The old man studied her for a moment, his expression changing from doubt to something that resembled relief. "You don't know what this means," he said, his voice low and filled with emotion. "I haven't been able to buy a ticket for days. I wasn't sure I'd make it back home." Lena's heart ached at the thought of his struggle. He reminded her so much of her own late father, strong in his youth, but worn down by years of hardship. She smiled again, this time with a gentler sincerity. "We all need help sometimes," she said, her voice steady, though her insides felt like they were unraveling. "Don't worry about it." The old man nodded, as if he understood more than words could express. Before he got on the bus, he turned to her once more, offering a quiet but profound gratitude in his eyes. "God bless you, child," he murmured. Lena stood there as the bus pulled away, her thoughts swirling. She had given her last bit of money away, the small reserve she had hoped would stretch through the week. She could feel the weight of her decision, but it wasn't a weight of regret. It was the weight of knowing that sometimes the right thing to do wasn't the easiest thing. And while she might have to sacrifice her own comfort for a while, she felt a quiet peace within her. Kindness, she realized, had its own way of filling the empty spaces, even when the world felt like it was running out of things to give. As she boarded her own bus moments later, Lena sat quietly, the hum of the engine surrounding her. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about the bills or the exhaustion. Instead, she thought about that old man's face and the quiet warmth that had passed between them. Perhaps, she thought, this small act of kindness had done more than just help him. It had reminded her of the strength she had within her, the strength that came not from the money in her wallet, but from the love and care she still carried in her heart. The world felt a little brighter, even if just for a moment. The days after Lena's small act of kindness felt as though they passed in slow motion, each moment heavy with the weight of her own exhaustion. The joy she had felt from helping the elderly man had begun to fade as the realities of her life crept back into focus. Bills still needed to be paid, groceries still needed to be bought, and her two children, who had once been her constant source of joy, were growing more distant, their own struggles taking root in ways she couldn't quite pinpoint. Lena worked tirelessly. There was no room for rest, no time to pause and reflect. Each day she was stretched thinner, doing her best to keep the apartment clean, the laundry folded, the meals on the table. But even her best efforts were met with frustration. Every paycheck felt inadequate, just enough to cover the most pressing bills, but never enough to create any sense of relief. There were days when Lena felt like she was running on fumes, trying to keep up a pace she wasn't sure she could maintain. In the rare moments she found to sit down, Lena would glance over at her children, Olivia, who had once been a bubbly and carefree girl, now sitting in her room withdrawn and quiet, and Ryan, who had become more rebellious, fighting against the invisible weight of their lives. The space between them had grown, and despite her best efforts to stay connected, Lena found herself at a loss. She didn't know how to fix it. One morning, after another restless night of trying to fall asleep, Lena woke up before the sun. Her body ached, her mind was foggy, but there was work to do. She had a stack of bills on the kitchen table, each one a reminder of just how far behind they were. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt truly rested, and the idea of spending another sleepless night filled her with dread. Still, there was no other choice. She had to keep going. As she moved through her morning routine, getting the kids ready for school and preparing breakfast, she found herself feeling more and more disconnected from the world around her. Olivia barely spoke, picking at her food as she stared off into space. Ryan was already dressed, but his eyes were dark with resentment, his expression hardened by things Lena didn't know how to fix. Lena's heart ached as she watched them. She wanted to reach out, to find the words that would help them understand that she was doing everything she could, but it felt like they were slipping further and further away from her. She tried to reassure herself, telling herself that this was just a phase, that they would come out of it eventually, but deep down, she knew something had changed. After dropping the kids off at school, Lena sat in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel as the weight of everything seemed to crash down on her. There was no time to waste on worrying about what had gone wrong, but the questions lingered. Why had her children become so distant? Why did she feel like she was constantly failing, no matter how hard she tried? She started the car, pulling out of the parking lot and driving aimlessly through the quiet streets. The cold morning air pressed against the windows as she drove, her mind racing with the uncertainty that had become her constant companion. At the red light, she caught sight of her reflection in the rearview mirror, tired eyes, a face lined with stress. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. This wasn't the person she had hoped to be, not the woman she had imagined herself becoming. Somewhere along the way, she had lost herself in the struggle. It wasn't until she turned onto a side street, passing a small cafe she had never noticed before, that a thought crossed her mind. She had always pushed aside her own desires for the sake of others. She had become so focused on surviving, on making sure her children were okay, that she had forgotten what it felt like to live for herself. Maybe it was time to change that. The idea seemed ridiculous at first, but it slowly took root. What if just for once she took a moment for herself? What if she could do something small, something for her own happiness without feeling guilty? It wasn't a big decision, but it felt monumental. The thought of doing something for herself, something that wasn't tied to her obligations as a mother or provider, brought with it a strange sense of liberation. It was terrifying, but in a way, it was also freeing. She could no longer afford to be everything to everyone. She had to start being something to herself. Lena parked the car in front of the cafe, her hands shaking as she turned off the engine. It was a small step, just a coffee, just a moment of quiet. But it was a step toward reclaiming something she had lost. As she sat in the corner of the cozy cafe, sipping her coffee and watching the world go by, Lena allowed herself to feel the weight of the silence. The noise of her life, of her responsibilities, had always drowned out everything else. But now, as the steam rose from her cup and the world outside continued on, she realized that she hadn't given herself permission to pause in a long time. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A reminder that she wasn't just a mother, a worker, a caregiver. She was still Lena, and that was enough. A month passed since Lena had given away her last penny, and life trudged on with the same relentless pace. The late nights at the diner, the endless errands, and the constant struggle to make ends meet. It was all beginning to feel like an insurmountable wave crashing over her. But despite the constant pressure, there was one small thing she held onto: hope. It was the only thing that kept her from sinking into the weight of it all. But even that hope was beginning to fray. Her kids had been doing their best to stay out of her way, sensing the quiet tension that hung around the house. Olivia had grown a little quieter, more introspective, while Ryan's rebellious streak had become more pronounced. Lena didn't blame him. She knew he was just a kid, but there were moments when he seemed too much like his father, always challenging her authority, always testing the boundaries. It was as if he was pushing against the walls of the life they had built together, hoping for something bigger, something different. One evening, after finishing her second job at the diner, Lena arrived home to the familiar smell of old takeout, containers and dishes piling up in the sink. It wasn't that she didn't want to do better for them, but sometimes it felt like the more she tried, the farther away her dreams slipped. She could barely keep the apartment tidy, let alone keep up with her children's needs. She longed for a moment of peace, for something to go right, but it always felt just out of reach. As she stepped through the door, her eyes immediately landed on the small stack of mail on the kitchen counter. Bills, ads, a few catalogs. Nothing new. But then, her fingers froze on the last envelope. It was a plain, white envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front was elegant, delicate. Something about it made her pause. She had seen handwriting like that before, almost like someone had written it with care, as if they had taken time to craft each letter with precision. There was no name, just her address. Her heart skipped a beat, a strange sense of anticipation building within her chest. She tore open the envelope with trembling fingers, almost afraid of what she might find inside. As the paper unfolded, a check fell into her hands, its surface smooth and untouched. She glanced at the amount, her breath caught in her throat. It was more than enough to cover the overdue bills that had been haunting her for weeks. The weight of the check in her hand felt almost unreal. But there was more. Beneath the check, a short letter was written in the same flowing script. To the woman who gave her last penny with kindness, may this gift help you in the way you helped me. From one who will never forget. Lena stood there, the room spinning around her. She read the words again, her heart thumping painfully in her chest. Could it be? She glanced at the check again, but there was no name, no explanation. Just the words on the page. For a long moment she stood still, feeling the weight of the letter and the check in her hands. The logical part of her mind screamed that this must be a mistake, a misunderstanding. It wasn't possible. There was no way that the old man she had helped could have known her situation, let alone have the means to help her in return. And yet, something deep inside her, the same gut feeling that had pushed her to help him in the first place, whispered that this was no coincidence. This was more than just a random act of kindness. It was the universe, or fate, or whatever force drove the world, stepping in when she had given everything she had. Tears stung the back of her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She couldn't afford to let herself break down now. Not with her children upstairs relying on her to be strong, but the emotion she felt wasn't just relief or gratitude. There was something else, something deeper. It was a realization that kindness, even when it seemed to go unnoticed, didn't fade. into nothingness. The old man, whom she had helped without thinking of what it would cost her, had found a way to repay her. Not just with money, but with a reminder that there was more to life than the struggle, more to life than the bills and the pressure. There was kindness, there was love, and there was a cycle of giving and receiving that never truly ended. She carefully placed the check back in the envelope, her hands still shaking from the unexpected turn of events. A part of her wondered if it was all too good to be true, if she was just imagining the whole thing. But the check was real. The words were real. And that, more than anything else, gave her a sense of hope she hadn't felt in months. As she folded the letter and placed it gently in the drawer, Lena felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just a financial blessing, it was a message. A reminder that there was always something to give, even when it felt like there was nothing left. She had helped that old man because it was the right thing to do, not expecting anything in return. But life had a way of surprising her, and now she had a gift, one that went far beyond money. And for the first time in a long time, Lena allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. The weeks following Lena's unexpected gift were a blur of activity. The bills were paid, the weight on her shoulders lightened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to breathe. There was still much to worry about, of course. The uncertainty of the future loomed large, and she knew better than to let one stroke of luck convince her that things would suddenly be easy. But for once, she felt something resembling peace settle in her chest. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Every evening, as she tucked her children into bed, Lena's mind would drift back to the old man. She found herself questioning the timing of it all. How could he have known when she needed help most? Had he seen something in her that she hadn't even recognized in herself? It wasn't just the money. It was the simple fact that someone, a stranger, had taken the time and effort to ensure that she wasn't alone in her struggle. And yet, the doubts started creeping in. There were days when she found herself standing at the kitchen counter, staring at the check the old man had sent, her fingers tracing the smooth surface. Was it possible that he hadn't truly understood her situation? Was it possible that he didn't know how desperate she had been, how close she had come to breaking? What if he had simply been a kind soul offering what he could, no more, no less? It didn't change the fact that she had been saved, but a part of her wanted to know the truth. Her children noticed the change too. Olivia had grown quiet, her innocent joy replaced with a subdued energy Lena didn't quite understand. Ryan had stopped complaining about his dad's absence, and though he still acted out, there was a new stillness in him, as if he were waiting for something. Waiting for a sign that his mother was finally going to be okay. It was in those moments that Lena realized how much she had been holding back. She had spent so much time pretending everything was fine, hiding the cracks in her soul. But the cracks were there, and they needed to be addressed. One afternoon, while Ryan was out playing with his friends and Olivia was napping, Lena decided to take a walk. The cool air felt like a balm on her skin, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to get lost in the simplicity of the world around her. The streets were quiet, the sky a deep blue. She walked past the park where her children played, past the local bakery that always smelled of fresh bread, and up the hill that led to the small lake at the edge of town. It was here, by the water, that she found herself reflecting on her life. How had she gotten here? How had she become the person who was willing to give everything, even when there was nothing left to give? There were so many things she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Grief, fear, loss, and it was all beginning to bubble up to the surface now. She had lived for her children, for survival, for the day-to-day struggles. But who was she when she wasn't fighting? Who was she when the struggle was over, when everything was calm? She sat on a weathered bench by the lake, watching the ripples on the water. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow across the horizon. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the weight of her own emotions, the ache of everything she had carried alone. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, miss," a man said, his voice deep and warm. Lena turned and saw a man standing a few feet away, looking at her with kind eyes. His face was familiar. It was the old man, the one she had helped months ago. The recognition hit her like a wave, and before she could stop herself, she was on her feet, moving toward him. "Wait," Lena said, her voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" The man smiled gently, his weathered hands resting at his sides. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay," he said softly. "I've been meaning to thank you properly." Lena froze, her heart racing. She had expected some kind of explanation, some sort of logical reason for the check, but she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to see him face to face, to hear his voice in person. "You've already thanked me," she said, her words feeling hollow as they left her lips. "You sent the check, and that was enough. You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to," he interrupted. "But I've been thinking about you, about what you did for me. It wasn't just the money, it was the kindness. You gave what you had, even when you had nothing left. And I'll never forget that." Lena felt a wave of emotion crash over her, and for a moment, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She wanted to scream out in frustration, to demand answers from him, but all that came out was a soft sob. "You don't have to thank me," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "I was just trying to do what was right," the old man nodded, his face softening with understanding. "You don't realize how much it meant to me. I've seen a lot of things in my life, and there's a lot of pain in this world. But you—" He stopped, his eyes searching hers. "You reminded me that there's still good left in people." Lena stood there, her heart torn between gratitude and disbelief. The weight of his words settled deep inside her. She had thought she was the one doing the giving, the one making a difference. But in that moment, she realized that the act of kindness had transformed them both. It wasn't just about the money, it was about connection, about sharing a piece of humanity in a world that often seemed too cold to care. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Lena and the old man stood together by the water, two strangers whose lives had intersected in the most unexpected of ways. They didn't need to say anything more. The silence between them spoke volumes, and for the first time in years, Lena felt a spark of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Hope. The weeks after the encounter by the lake had been a whirlwind of emotions for Lena. She couldn't shake the memory of the old man's words, or the way he had looked at her, as if seeing something in her that she hadn't recognized in herself. She had tried to move on, to focus on her children and the small steps of progress she was making in her life. But the encounter had left a lingering sense of unease. There was something about that moment that felt like it had shifted her world, and she wasn't sure she was ready for the change. At the same time, Lena couldn't deny the quiet sense of pride that had settled within her. The old man's gratitude had planted a seed of confidence in her heart, reminding her of the power of kindness. In the chaos of her daily struggles, she had lost sight of the fact that her actions, however small, could have a lasting impact. Maybe she didn't need to have everything figured out after all. Maybe just being present, being kind, was enough. But as the days passed, Lena found herself feeling more and more disconnected from her children. Olivia, who had once been her sweet, optimistic little girl, had become withdrawn, her spark dimming, as she spent more time in her room, avoiding the world outside. Ryan, too, had grown quieter, less rebellious but more distant. It was as if the weight of their lives was beginning to press on them, and they were carrying it in ways that Lena didn't understand. She knew they had been affected by their father's absence, by the constant strain of living paycheck to paycheck, but she had no idea how to help them navigate the emotional minefield they were all caught in. One afternoon, after coming home from work, Lena sat down at the kitchen table, exhaustion weighing on her body. She had just enough energy to make dinner for the kids before she collapsed into bed. As she sorted through the mail, something caught her eye. A small, plain package. It wasn't much, just a simple cardboard box with no markings. She frowned as she opened it, unsure of what to expect. Inside, nestled in soft tissue paper, was a small, intricately woven scarf. It was made of the softest wool, a deep shade of blue that seemed to shimmer in the light. For a moment, Lena stared at it, confused. Then, she saw the attached note, folded neatly inside the box. To the woman who showed me that there is still goodness in the world, may this small gift bring you comfort, as you have brought comfort to me. Lena's hands trembled as she read the words. She knew who it was from, even before she turned the scarf over and saw the familiar handwriting. It was from the old man, the one she had helped all those months ago. The realization hit her like a wave, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. She had given him a small gift, just a few dollars, for a bus ticket, and now he had given her something far more valuable, something that spoke not just to the material, but to the soul. She held the scarf in her hands, her fingers brushing over the delicate threads, and felt a wave of emotions she couldn't quite name. The weight of the old man's gesture was more than just a gift. It was a message. He hadn't simply sent her a token of gratitude. He had sent her something to remind her of who she was, of the kindness that still existed within her, even when the world around her felt too harsh and unforgiving. She sat there holding the scarf. Lena realized something profound. She had spent so long focusing on what she didn't have, the money, the stability, the answers. But what she had always had, even when she hadn't recognized it, was the ability to give. The old man's gift wasn't just a symbol of his gratitude. It was a reminder that she didn't need to have everything to offer something meaningful. She didn't need to have all the answers, all the money, or even all the time. What mattered was that she had love, and that love had the power to transform not just her life, but the lives of those around her. For the first time in a long while, Lena felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from solving all her problems or fixing everything that was broken. It was a deeper peace, the kind that came from accepting that she was enough, just as she was. The weight of the world hadn't disappeared, but in that moment, it felt more bearable. She wasn't alone. She had always been surrounded by the people who mattered most to her, her children, the old man, and, in a way, the very kindness that had brought them all together. That evening, as Lena prepared dinner with Olivia and Ryan, she noticed a shift. Olivia had come out of her room, smiling in a way that was unfamiliar but comforting. Ryan had stopped his usual complaints and actually helped set the table, an unspoken understanding passing between them. It wasn't perfection, but it was something real. Lena knew that their lives weren't suddenly perfect, that the struggles weren't over, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw hope in the little moments, the way Olivia's eyes sparkled when she laughed, the way Ryan looked at her with a new understanding. Maybe things weren't as broken as they had seemed, and maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as cold and unkind as she had feared. The morning after receiving the scarf, Lena felt like she was waking up to a world she had never truly seen before. The weight of her doubts and worries hadn't vanished overnight, but they had shifted, softened by something unexpected. It was the act of receiving kindness, of having someone reach out to her when she least expected it, that had cracked open a part of her heart she hadn't realized had been closed off for so long. She had always given, always sacrificed, but rarely had she been the one to receive. And in that moment, it became clear. To truly give, you had to be willing to accept as well. Olivia and Ryan were different too. Lena had noticed the small changes in them over the past few days. Subtle, but significant. Olivia, who had been withdrawn and quieter, was now more present, her laughter filling the house again. She no longer spent hours locked away in her room, lost in her thoughts. Instead, she had started to talk about her day more, asking Lena questions about her childhood, sharing stories about her friends. It was as if the weight she had been carrying had lifted, even if only a little, and in its place, a new sense of connection had taken root. Ryan, too, had shifted. His rebellious nature hadn't entirely disappeared, but there was a new understanding between them. He was still distant, still grappling with the absence of his father, but there was a tenderness in the way he looked at Lena now, something that suggested he was beginning to see her as more than just the person who fed and disciplined him. He was starting to see her as a person in her own right, with hopes and struggles, with dreams that hadn't been fully realized yet. The change was slow, but it was there, and for Lena, that was enough. But even as these small victories unfolded, within her family, Lena couldn't shake the nagging sense that something was still missing. She had spent so many years being the strong one, the caretaker, the giver. But now, with the old man's gift hanging over her like a silent promise, she began to ask herself, what was it that she had been running from? What was it that she had neglected in her relentless pursuit of doing the right thing for everyone else? The answer came to her slowly, as it often does in quiet moments of reflection. She had been running from herself. She had been so focused on surviving, on making sure her children had enough, on keeping the apartment warm and the lights on, that she had forgotten to dream for herself. She had forgotten what it meant to have hopes beyond the immediate survival of the day. For the first time in years, Lena allowed herself to entertain the idea of something more. What would it be like to have a life outside of the grind? To have a moment where she wasn't just struggling to make ends meet, but actually living, truly living, with all the joy and pain that came with it? Could she allow herself the luxury of thinking about her own happiness, her own future? The idea was both exhilarating and terrifying. That evening, after dinner, Lena sat at the kitchen table, staring at the scarf that now rested on the chair beside her. It seemed so small in comparison to everything she had been carrying, yet it was a gift that had unraveled something inside of her. She had always believed that kindness was something given freely, without expectation. But the truth was, kindness was also something that could change the giver, as much as it changed the receiver. The old man had given her more than just a physical object. He had given her the opportunity to rediscover herself, to heal from years of self-sacrifice, to begin the process of becoming whole again. She folded the scarf carefully, setting it aside. She had a decision to make. It wasn't enough to just be thankful for the kindness she had received. She had to start living in a way that reflected the lessons she had learned. For the first time, she thought about what she truly wanted for herself, not just for her children, but for her own heart. She had put everyone else's needs before hers for so long that she had forgotten what it meant to have desires of her own. She had forgotten what it was like to dream. The realization that she was worthy of those dreams, of her own happiness, was both liberating and daunting. Lena had always been a fighter, always willing to sacrifice everything for the people she loved. But now, for the first time, she asked herself, what if she allowed herself to be worthy of her own love? The next few days passed in a blur of self-discovery. Lena spent more time with her children, but she also spent time alone, reflecting on the future. She had always assumed her life would be defined by struggle, by the quiet sacrifice of giving everything to others. But now, she began to think that perhaps the greatest gift she could give her family was the example of a mother who dared to live fully, who dared to claim her own joy. And then, one evening, she decided to take the first step. It wasn't a big step, but it was a step forward. She signed up for an adult education class, a creative writing course she had seen advertised months ago but had never allowed herself to consider. She had always loved writing, but it had been pushed aside, buried under the weight of responsibilities. Now, she was giving herself permission to explore it again. It wasn't much, but it was everything. It was the beginning of her own rebirth, a recognition that she could be both a mother and an individual, a giver and a receiver. Lena knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be struggles, still moments of doubt and fear. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace in knowing that she didn't have to carry everything alone. The cycle of kindness, the one she had started by helping a stranger, was now coming full circle. She had received what she needed, and in doing so, she had found the strength to give again. But this time, she was giving to herself.